At 86, Tom Brokaw has officially run out of things to pretend he doesn't think. He is the last of a dying breed. The man who watched the Berlin Wall crumble live on television while the rest of the world was still fumbling with their VCRs. For years, he kept his thoughts on Savannah Guthrie tucked away in a neat professional box. But that box has finally flown open, and the legend is no longer holding back. There is something liberating about turning 86. You stop worrying about the corporate holiday card list. Tom Brokaw spent half a century being the voice of God, the anchor whose vocal cords sounded like expensive mahogany and a very dry martini. He was the gold standard, the man who narrated the end of the 20th century without breaking a sweat or losing his pocket square. But lately, watching the Today Show from the quiet of his Montana ranch, far from the synthetic glow of Studio 1A, he has developed some very specific thoughts about the woman currently steering the ship. That woman is Savannah Guthrie, and when Brokaw looks at her, he does not simply see a news anchor. He sees a revolution in a power suit. For years, the rumor mill inside the 30 Rock hallways whispered that the old guard, the guys who remembered when news was delivered by men with deep voices and zero visible emotion, were not exactly thrilled with the more caffeinated, personality-forward direction of modern morning television. Brokaw just blew that narrative clean out of the water. He did not issue a dry, prepared statement through a publicist. Instead, he offered the journalistic equivalent of a warm handshake, acknowledging that Guthrie is not simply filling the shoes of the legends before her. She is reinventing the wheel while driving the car at 80 miles per hour. She's got the legal brain of a prosecutor and the relatability of a neighbor. A source close to the veteran anchor suggests he has been saying behind closed doors. And for those who know Brokaw, that is about the highest compliment the man is capable of giving. Tom always wanted facts delivered straight, but he also understood storytelling. In Savannah, he recognizes someone who can grill a world leader until they squirm and then pivot effortlessly to a segment about air fryer recipes without appearing to have lost a single ounce of her soul. It is a tightrope walk, and Brokaw, the original tightrope walker, has finally decided she deserves her flowers. But this is not just about professional courtesy. There is a layer of history here that makes the endorsement carry real weight. The transition from the Brokaw era to the Guthrie era was not a smooth, paved road. It was a distracted drive through a construction zone. When Matt Lauer's career went up in a spectacular mushroom cloud of scandal in 2017, the house that Brokaw helped build was shaking at its foundations. NBC News, once a powerhouse, briefly looked like a sinking ship. Tom watched from the sidelines as Savannah stepped into the wreckage, took the hits, managed the awkward on-air apologies, and somehow kept the lights on. His recent words of validation are essentially the old pro saying, "Yeah, I see what you did there." He recognizes that Savannah had to do something he never really had to. She had to be vulnerable. In Brokaw's day, an anchor who showed emotion on air caused viewers to check the thermostat. In Savannah's world, if you do not show some humanity, the audience flips to a TikTok compilation of cats. His praise signals that he is not some relic stuck in 1984. He understands that the voice of God has been replaced necessarily and permanently by the voice of the friend. Before we can fully appreciate where Savannah Guthrie stands today, it helps to understand the road Tom Brokaw had to build to get there. Imagine a world with no internet. News arrived on physical paper that smelled like ink and urgency. The evening broadcast was a secular version of church, and the man behind the desk was its priest. That was Tom's playground. He grew up in South Dakota, about as far from the neon corridors of 30 Rock as you can get without landing on a different planet. He was a kid from the prairie with a voice that sounded like it belonged on the radio before he even hit puberty, and a restless, frontier spirit that refused to fit inside a 9-to-5 box. He worked his way up through local stations, learned the hard way that in the news business being second is essentially being extinct, and by the time he reached the big leagues in the 60s and 70s, the golden age of American journalism was just coming to a boil, and Tom was right there in the kitchen. Back then, the newsroom was not the sterile glass and chrome palace we know today. It was a chaotic, cigarette smoke-filled bunker with unreliable teleprompters, no Google to fact-check a senator's lies in 3 seconds, and certainly no social media team worrying about whether your hair was on brand for the 6 o'clock slot. It was raw, loud, and frankly a bit of a Shark Tank. Tom thrived in it. He had an uncanny ability to stay cool while the world caught fire around him, through Watergate, through Vietnam, through every national wound that needed a steady voice to narrate it. He became part of the Big Three alongside Peter Jennings and Dan Rather. These men were more than anchors, they were the arbiters of truth for 100 million Americans. If Tom said it happened, it happened. There was a gravity to the role that is almost impossible to explain to someone who grew up with news alerts buzzing on their wristwatch. You did not scroll through headlines. You waited for Tom to give them to you. He traveled the globe, flew into war zones with a notebook and a quiet prayer, and proved he was never just a suit behind a desk. The defining moment of his career came in 1989, standing at the Berlin Wall as the tectonic plates of history shifted beneath his boots, telling the world that the Iron Curtain was being shredded. It was the kind of moment that careers and centuries are measured against. But the Wild West had its dark side. The grind was brutal and life-consuming. Missed birthdays, holidays in hotel rooms, in countries most people couldn't find on a map, the relentless pressure to be bulletproof when the nation needed someone to lean on. He lived his professional life in 30-minute increments, and the voice of God persona demanded a level of perfection that would have destroyed most people. There was also the ego, fierce, necessary, and unapologetic, that came with fighting not just for ratings, but for what he believed was the soul of the American narrative. As the 90s bled into the new millennium, the world began to change beneath his feet. The 24-hour news cycle was born, and the slow, deliberate ritual of the evening broadcast began to feel like a relic. Tom saw the writing on the wall. He had spent his career as the chronicler of the greatest generation, a term he literally coined and turned into a best-selling book, and he understood, perhaps better than anyone, that an era was ending. When he stepped down from the nightly news anchor chair in 2004, people cried. It felt like the closing of a chapter in American life. But he did not simply fade into the Montana sunset. He stayed around, watching as the internet tore down the gatekeepers, as the news became less about what happened and more about how do we feel about what happened, and as a sharp-as-attack lawyer named Savannah Guthrie started making waves in the very building where he'd spent his life. If Tom Brokaw's career was a slow-burn prestige drama filmed on 35mm film, Savannah Guthrie's rise was a high-speed legal thriller edited for the modern age. She did not come up through the same police scanner and local pancake breakfast circuit as the old guard. She was a lawyer first, a litigator who knew how to find the crack in a witness's story before they had even finished their sentence. When she traded the courtroom for the newsroom, she brought that don't-mess-with-me energy into a building that was still, arguably, a bit of a boys' club. She did not walk into 30 Rock and get handed the keys to the kingdom. She fought for every inch of ground, doing the grunt work, standing outside the White House in a freezing drizzle at 4 a.m, waiting for a press secretary who was probably going to lie to her anyway. But there was something about her, an approachable brainiac quality. She could explain a complex Supreme Court ruling as though you were sharing a glass of wine, and then turn around and grill a politician until they started sweating through their television makeup. When Savannah joined the Today Show team in 2011, she stepped onto what can only be described as a landmine wrapped in a velvet cushion, the most coveted and most dangerous job in morning television. Then came the 2017 earthquake, the Matt Lauer scandal. When the face of the franchise disappeared in a flash of headlines and HR reports, the building did not just shake. It imploded. That was Savannah's moment, her trial by fire. The world watched to see whether she would melt. Instead, she sat at that desk beside Hoda Kotb and did something Brokaw's generation almost never dared. She was honest. She admitted on air that she was heartbroken, confused, and doing her best to process the news in real time alongside the viewers. It was a masterclass in modern leadership. She did not just report the news, she lived it with her audience. That was the true beginning of the Savannah era. She redefined what a morning host could be. Before her, you were either the serious news person or the fun lifestyle person. Savannah decided she could be both without an identity crisis. She could anchor the Republican National Convention one day and laugh through a segment about organizing your junk drawer the next. The critics sharpened their knives. She was too sharp-elbowed, and could two women really anchor the show together? But Savannah kept leaning into her strengths, developing an interviewing style that became her signature. A smile that is actually a trap, letting a guest talk themselves into a corner before pointing out with surgical precision the one thing they forgot to account for. Behind the scenes, the ascent was just as grueling as Tom's, just in different ways. While Brokaw dodged bullets in war zones, Savannah was dodging the digital bullets of the 24-hour outrage cycle, maintaining composure while the very concept of truth was being debated in real time on every platform imaginable. She also did it all while becoming a mother in her 40s, a journey involving IVF, prayers, needles, and the particular exhaustion of sitting in a national spotlight while wondering whether your child's fever broke before the show started. When she nearly lost sight in one eye after a freak accident with her son and a toy train, she returned to the desk wearing glasses, looking vulnerable, and once again did not hide it. She told the story. She let the